So the first question for consideration in tonight's Living Torah is simply this. Why is there this constant need to have to remember the Exodus? Why do we put so much emphasis on this? Why is it such a focal point of our Jewish life and living? And here's something of an answer. I recently watched a viral video that literally attracted millions of views on YouTube. And I guess the best way to appreciate this is if I try to paint a picture of the setting for you. And essentially, it was a homeless man who was blind. It's a beautiful spring day. And as he's sitting there begging for money, in front of him stands a small tin can. The passersby are supposed to put the change they carry in their pockets. And beside him, he had a cardboard sign that somebody had written out for him at his request saying, "I'm blind, please help." Now, his sign isn't particularly successful. You hear a coin dropping here, a coin dropping there. Most people are clearly just walking past. Then after a while, a young lady comes along and she stops and she looks at the cardboard sign for a moment. And then she takes the cardboard, turns it around and writes something else on the back of it. And once she's done, she put the cardboard back in place with her writing now facing the front. And then she leaves, not a word. The blind man isn't able to see what she did, can't see what she wrote, but the difference he clearly notices right away. And that is that business starts to flourish after she left. More and more people are clearly dropping change into his little tin can as they walk by. The continuous sound of falling coins puts, understandably, a smile on his face. And after a while, the young lady comes back to see how things were going. And the blind man immediately recognizes the sound of her footsteps, the smell of her perfume. His hearing sense is heightened. He says, "What did you do? You're the woman, aren't you, that came by earlier?" And she says, "Yes. Your sign read, 'I'm blind, please help.' I wrote the same message, but in very different words." And then the camera view turns towards the cardboard and her writing appears there. "It's a beautiful day, and I cannot see it." I wondered why there's such a big difference between these two signs. I mean, the first, barely anybody gives. The second, almost everybody is giving. How could a simple phrase have such a dramatic impact on people's behavior? And the answer, I think, is simply this. The first sign, "I'm blind, please help." It's a statement of fact, granted. It's saying, "I've got problems, help me." Most people walking past are probably thinking like, "Hey, I'm busy. I don't know who you are. And guess what? I've also got problems. Leave me alone." That appeal resulted only in the occasional coin every now and then. But the statement, "It's a beautiful day and I can't see it," has a completely different effect on people. It makes us feel grateful. It's a beautiful day. Suddenly we're aware of the fact that, hey, you know what? It is a beautiful day. The sunshine, the lovely weather, the flowers blooming, the beautiful blue sky, and we feel grateful. And feeling grateful triggers compassion and kindness. A little feeling of gratitude makes a big difference in the way that we behave in our everyday interactions. And so after seeing this video, I actually understood an interesting argument about the command to remember our slavery in Egypt. When the Jews were released from Egyptian slavery, the Torah later tells us you must not mistreat or oppress a stranger in any way. Remember, you yourselves were once strangers in the land of Egypt. So simply put, the Torah is telling us that the experience of our ancestors in Egypt should be giving us perspective, should be life-changing. Having lived and suffered as strangers, we have to become the people commanded to care for strangers. That's the understanding, the normative understanding of the command. There's a very famous commentary, classic commentary, profound commentary, known as the Baal HaTurim. And he gives a completely different and alternative interpretation of this verse. He maintains that the verse to remember that we were slaves in Egypt doesn't refer to our suffering. In other words, we suffered as strangers, we should be kind to the stranger. But it actually refers very specifically to one incident that stood out just prior to our Exodus. The Torah refers to the time right before the Exodus when the Egyptians wanted the Jews already to leave. And they said to the Jews, "Hurry up, leave." And we know that they also gave the Jews a lot of gold and a lot of silver. And it was this which allowed them to emerge from slavery into freedom with the means to survive, and indeed to build a sanctuary in the desert and much else besides. So the meaning of our passage, according to this Baal HaTurim, is that we should base our compassion not because we suffered, therefore we should be compassionate to others, but upon the one good thing that the Egyptians did for us when we least expected it. The gratitude, rather than the misery, should cause us to be gracious and help others. You see, this Balaturma is arguing that for many people, identifying personally with the disadvantaged, as we saw in the case of the blind man collecting money, that's not enough to bring about compassionate conduct. That video illustrates that. The point is that, I've got my own problems. So he understands the Torah verse to be emphasizing not the memory of the suffering, but the memory of gratitude, which of course leads to love and kindness. Be good, not because you were unlucky, but because you were lucky. Support the disadvantaged because you were once the recipient of a stranger's kindness and compassion. So here's the key, and a very important message. It's not enough to think you're grateful. You have to feel it. It's the feeling that makes the real difference. Lots of people say they're grateful, but they don't necessarily make time to be grateful. It's so easy in life to lose track of the beauty and grace of what we already have. If we don't consciously take the time to do something every day to feel blessed and be grateful, then invariably frustration, anger, and the stresses of life start to creep in and dominate. And that really, in its own unique way, is a choice point that Pesach teaches us every year, why we need to remember the Exodus daily as well. And indeed, why Judaism tells us to begin every day by saying Moda'ani, a few minutes of gratitude. It's the first thing that we say in the morning. Because the wind on my face, the love in my life, the opportunities and the blessings that I experience, it all is there and it all exists. And the emphasis of remembering the Exodus daily is making the point not only to notice, but to deeply feel an appreciation for all those little things that make life meaningful and rich. And when we do, that's when and how we experience personal redemption in our lives every single day. But let's go a little bit further. Why is our whole Pesach experience different to every other celebration? Every commemorative event incorporates lavish feasts, celebration. Everything is upbeat, right? It's the age-old Jewish joke now. Every festival is, they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. Well, in regard to every other festival, we put only the emphasis on we won, let's eat. Hence, the lighting of the menorah and eating of latkes, the drinking of alcohol and eating of a big meal on Purim, etc., etc. Cheesecake on Shavuot, eating in a sukkah, whatever it is. Pesach, on the other hand, includes bitter herbs, unleavened bread, and even a recollection of some of our tumultuous past, which we read about in the Haggadah. It's like our Jewish neuroticism necessitates us dragging our skeletons out of the closet. Why? Have you ever watched an Olympic relay race? It's not down, of course, to individual prowess, but very much a team effort. Each of the four runners are utterly dependent on the next. I can run the track in record time. I can be as good as I can be, but then I have to hand the baton on to the next guy. And if he doesn't deliver, then guess what? I lose too. Imagine if one of those runners suddenly decides that they don't want to give it their all. Imagine the first guy makes it around in record time. He hands off to the second guy who still keeps the team in the lead. The third guy in turn is maintaining the momentum and the team looks like it's heading to gold. He's pumping his way down the track towards the anchor, and the final runner, who is the anchor, suddenly thinks to himself, I can't be bothered. It's not for me. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here anyway. I want to go home. And then just before he turns his back on his co-runners, he sees number 3 holding out that baton from his long arm, arching out towards him. And he finds himself instinctively reaching back to take hold of it. At that precise moment, as he feels that baton touching his hand, he also feels the sweat, the past 4 years of training, the energy, the excitement, the dreams, the hopes of his country and his teammates. He looks around him and he takes in the scene of thousands of people cheering him on. Millions more watching from the comfort of their homes. And he grips this baton tight between his fingers and a reality dawns upon him. I've trained every day for this moment. Everything about me, about who I am and what I represent is contained in this here and now. I cannot let my team down. He takes hold and he runs, making his way towards the finish line, towards gold. See, that's our reality as well. There are times when we lose the desire to carry on. There are days when we just can't be bothered. You might even feel sorry for ourselves. And we might be rightfully entitled to do so, but the race isn't just about you, is it? The deliberate instruction of the Pesach celebration is that we start off talking about the shame, the pain, the struggle endured. And we incorporate bitter elements into our menu. But we finish on a high note. We don't just talk about how difficult it was for our ancestors to run their lap, but also focus on how they completed it. And they passed the baton on to us. You look to your past and you'll readily identify many who came before you, who also had their struggles and their turmoil, but they never abandoned hope. They never walked away. Quite the contrary. They passed the baton on, which is precisely why we are here in the first instance, why we're all still in the race. We a very exhausting time the last couple of years, physically, emotionally. Life's been a lot of stop-start, to say the least. And no one can deny it takes a certain kind of energy to summon the strength to embark on a new lap, as it were. But that's when it's in precisely those moments that we're called upon to rise to the particular challenge, to dig deep towards our forest thrust. It's easy to feel fatigued. It's tempting to shrug our shoulders and simply say, I can't be bothered right now. It's too much for me. But we're not running this race alone. We're only living proudly as Jews in the 21st century precisely because of the conviction of those before us. And a lot of other people are also depending on us, family, community, our past, our future. We're all in it together. Sure, there are times when the baton feels really heavy in our hands, especially when the feelings are a little overwhelming. But just as that baton made its way through Egypt and the Crusades and the Inquisitions and the pogroms and the Holocaust, through all the trials and tribulations, the pains and pleasures, the high moments and the devastating ones, it now somehow made its way miraculously around the track again and again, passed on from generation to generation, and it's now passed on to us. And here we are. What do? You've got to run your lap. You've got to ignite your spark. You've got to summon your energy. It's easy to say, it's not for me. I've managed so long now without, I can manage more without. But the future of our team is in our hands. The rest of the team is depending on us. And it's in that sort of moment that we have to think of everything that went into this moment and also look ahead towards the finish line. Hence, the Haggadah is structured with starting off in shame and then concluding with praise and glory and all the rest. The reality is both the hard bits, the marar, as well as the happiness and the jubilation, they're both essential. The sweat and the tears are integral to winning the race. The majesty and the magic of Jewish history is based on the synthesis between the two. The points of reference that have always defined Judaism ought to serve as catalysts for the journeys of the future, invigorating growth and inspiring expansiveness. We, the Jewish people, have tasted the bread of affliction and the bitter herbs of oppression, but we've never given in to despair. On Pesach, each Jew feels innately compelled to abandon whatever negative emotions. The soul that felt the hand of God a little more than 3,000 years ago feels it again every year on Pesach and is moved to get involved in the celebration, to renew the commitment to stand up as proud and confident Jews, again, not just for ourselves, but indeed for all of humanity. Now let's talk a little bit about the whole notion of freedom, because you think to yourself that maybe freedom is an unusual word to I don't know, banter about it in the 21st century. Why do we have to talk about freedom? It's not like we're living in slavery. Who's in slavery? We're all perfectly comfortable living in lands of liberty. So what is it we're talking about when we're talking about freedom? What is it that we're really referring to in this context? Some of the most stirring words ever written in the English language are to be found in the United States Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson. We behold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Simply put, we were born to be free. Since the dawn of time, from the Jewish Exodus till the present, humanity has been almost single-minded in its pursuit of freedom. Every year, when we celebrate the festival of Pesach, we try to capture some of that sentiment, to pause and reflect upon what we might otherwise take for granted, to really appreciate what it means to be free. So we spent a tantalizing several hours in the diaspora, 2 nights running, attempting to relive some of the history, trying to somehow ingrain or feel within ourselves some of that initial sense of slavery and the feelings of liberty. But then we have to stop and ask, who are we kidding? Again, what does it mean to experience liberty? We're living in freedom. We're living in liberty. Slavery is an anachronistic idea. It's relegated to a tragic past strewn with human rights violations. So how do we hope to capture some of the sentiment of a past we can't relate to? Arizona Senator John McCain, who sadly already passed away a number of years ago, he captured the United States of America's imagination when he made his presidential bid in 2008, and his story then started to be told. McCain was a fighter pilot in the height of the Vietnam War. In 1967, his plane was shot down over Hanoi. He ejected in time. He broke both arms and a leg before suffering a concussion when landing in a lake. And the Viet Cong imprisoned him at the famous Hanoi Hilton together with other American prisoners of war. He was regularly beaten. He was tortured. He was placed in near constant solitary confinement. Something changed, however. His father became promoted to the rank of commander of all the naval forces in the Pacific. And the Viet Cong felt it prudent to release his son from his hellish prison. He's summoned before the commander and informed that he's about to be set free. But what happened next awed the citizens of the United States and much of the rest of the world. McCain refused to go free because the US Military Code of Conduct for POWs stipulates that prisoners are to be released only in the order in which they were captured. So the commandant went on to break McCain's ribs, smash his teeth, and break his arms again. But that mangled young soldier lying there on the floor of the ruthless tyrant's office was more of a man and more free than, frankly, most of us here today. Here's my point. Every human is comprised of 4 fundamentals, such that even if one element might be free, the same might not be said about the others. You have your body, you have your source, your soul or your life force, you have your humanity or your dignity, and finally, you have your acceptance and your involvement in the wider world. Those are really the 4 parts that make up the human being: body, soul, dignity, and your wider environment. Let's consider each of these in context. Enslavement of the body is the most common form of slavery, as we know it. The African slaves of yesteryear and any slaves of today are told the same thing: you don't own your own body, it belongs to us. And whilst people once experienced this in a very real and tangible way, today it exists in other subtler forms, such as in the workplace. Like the Jews in Egyptian servitude and those in other forms of slavery, you have quotas to meet for fear of consequence should you not complete them. And sometimes you spend every waking hour pursuing them. Ask yourself honestly if work doesn't sometimes consume a person to a point where it controls them. Time for oneself or one family, it's just non-existent. Or you can become so caught up in the work that you're oblivious even to what's going on around. It's effectively your normal. That's slavery of the body. When you find yourself confined to one place for whatever the reason, when frankly you would rather or should rather be somebody else, somewhere else. The Jews in Egypt, they were physically enslaved. And this was then the first form of expression that God used when redeeming the Jewish people. I will liberate you from the burdens of Egypt. That's the first cup of wine on Seder night, which focuses our minds on the need to be liberated from the enslavement to our back-breaking labor, so to speak. That's what we have to concentrate on as the first step out of our Seder night. Freedom of the body. What are we shackled to? What do we need to break free from to be able to enjoy instead? Then there's slavery of the soul. Slavery of the soul is perhaps best summed up in the words of Frances Wright, a 19th century thinker, when she said, "Who speaks of liberty while the human mind is in chains?" Again, as in the example of John McCain, the empirical measure of physical labor is only as crushing as the human spirit allows it to be. When you exert yourself for the sake of a loved one, the physical effort is always going to be lightened by the subjective love. Even as you're working hard, it's your pleasure. But then the reverse can be said as well, is also true. You can have all the creature comforts in the world, but your spirit can be suffocating in the captivity of a broken spirit. Many a successful individual can readily attest to having a life of opulence, but still being engulfed in an abyss, an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Because beyond all the physical needs, they're eminently unhappy. The material trappings essentially just mask over a deep emotional void. You're physically free, but your spirit is crushed under the burdens of despair. Now, let's face it, your soul is the deepest part of yourself through which you express yourself, from which you define your calling, and by which you fly high in life. But if someone or something is crushing your soul, then what really is the point and purpose of the rest of it? Superficially, you're presumed happy. Nice house, nice car, nice everything, nice holiday. You have a postcard picture, perfect life. But at the core, you're empty. How many famous rock stars, movie stars, celebrities of all different sorts do we know for whom the world seems to be their oyster? And then we recoil in shock when we hear about their alcoholism, their drug overdose, or when they just suddenly lose their temper and smack somebody else in front of millions of people at the Oscars. The point is that no matter what they had, their souls are engulfed in some kind of abyss. There's a certain emptiness that gets filled with that drug, alcohol, or whatever other addictions in order to mask over the emotional void. And it's corresponding to that God says, I will save you. And over which we drink the second cup of wine. In the second phase of their emancipation, God is telling the Israelites, I will liberate your bodies and also save your souls. The second cup basically says to us, with all your baggage, with all your broken heart, with your messy emotions, get more in tune with your spiritual self, with your soul, because it is there that you will find healing. It is there that in spite of all the pain that doesn't seem to go away, you will find faith and healing. Then there's our humanity. Dignity is man's final refuge, even when everything else seems all but doomed. We can talk about freedom of body, we can talk about freedom of spirit, but ultimately man's true freedom is cemented in his humanity and dignity. We can be free of all the physical slavery, our souls can be calm and tranquil, but we can still remain broken if our sense of dignity and humanity is in doubt. Martin Luther King, famous for his I Have a Dream speech, within which he declared, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Thing is, the African slaves gained their freedom more than 100 years before in 1863. So what freedom was he referring to? And the point is that even when blacks were granted freedom of the body, as they were no longer enslaved, and yes, freedom of the soul, because black literature and black thought flourished, they were still being subjected to segregation and discrimination. They were still being denied their basic humanity. The separate but equal tagline of the Jim Crow laws in the Southern United States speaks volumes about this reality. Until the black man was treated as human and as precious as the white man, he was indeed not free. You know, one of the things we're told that the Egyptians did to the Jewish people was simply switch their jobs around. They literally had men, changing nappies, if you will, and women digging trenches. They had men doing women's tasks and women doing men's tasks. And they did this all very deliberately with the objective of simply trying to take away their dignity, to strip them of their dignity. Even as we have our physical freedom and we may be in tune to the rhythm of our souls, others can rob us of our dignity. Dignity means a belief in yourself, that you're worthy. It means that what I have to say is important. And that then is the third cup of wine, the third expression when God promises salvation to the people. He's assuring them that more than their physical and spiritual freedom, he'll ensure that dignity is restored to them. That dignity that was stripped from them over those 2 centuries will come back. And when we drink that third cup of wine, we commit ourselves to the following principle. And that is that dignity really means that I deserve the best I can receive, and that I have the responsibility to give the best I can to other people as well. And finally, there is the sense of community and belonging. Consider the marvels of modern technology. You can do your shopping online, which is then delivered to your front door the next day. You can enjoy your job and otherwise be happily entertained by your TV, the internet, and your smartphone. Today's home life is often made up with parents sending an email to their kids in their bedrooms to let them know the supper is ready. Or you picking up a voice message from your wife to say that the frozen dinner is in the microwave when you get home from your late night meeting. You know that you are a full citizen enjoying life's privileges, yet you could still not be fully free because you have no sense of belonging. Your life is so insular. You're confined to that ship in Longfellow's haunting poem, right? Ships that pass in the night and speak to each other in passing. Then darkness again and a silence. Everything can be going on in your life and going well. But you operate in a parallel universe. You work and you play alongside other people rather than with other people. Your minimalistic engagement with your community ultimately leaves you isolated and trapped in your own world. In fact, that's the whole beauty of Shabbat. It weaves a tapestry through the days of the week and binds them as one. Every day is independent from the next. Monday has nothing to do with Tuesday, which in turn has nothing to do with Wednesday, etc. But Shabbat infuses meaning and purpose into the mundane and unites all the separate days into some common goal, which is why it's a beautiful time for community as well. It takes us individuals operating independent from one another and brings us together under the same roof, whether in shul or whether in each other's homes. The Jews in Egypt experienced enslavement on every one of these levels. There was enslavement of the body as they were subjected to harsh physical labor. There was enslavement of the soul as hopelessness and despair permeated to their very core, eroding their individual souls. Their humanity is stripped away as they are subjected to degradation and deliberately made to carry out humiliating tasks. And there was certainly no sense of belonging and community. After all, they were a group of persecuted individuals without any collective identity, nation, or homeland. And on Seder night, we drink 4 cups of wine corresponding to the 4 expressions of redemption, which in turn is in response to the 4 types of slavery experienced. Seder night challenges us to consider whether somewhere within these 4 categories of servitude, we can find and relate to some element of confinement, which we each might experience in one form or another in our personal lives. Are you consumed with work such that you neglect friends and family? Are you comfortable in life, but perhaps uncomfortable with life? Are you being given your adequate space within which to best express yourself? And even if you have it all, are you alone, disconnected, isolated, lacking a sense of belonging to your wider community? You see, yes, we might think we're free, but if we can relate to any of the aforementioned, any degree of slavery in the context of what we just said, then we need to take a good hard look and celebrate Pesach and the Seder in particular on a whole different level. We have to look to walk away from the experience with life in better perspective and indeed feeling more liberated, freer spirits and loftier souls. 4 cups, 4 expressions, 4 experiences. Pesach focuses our minds on the need to address these issues, should they exist in our lives, so that we, like the Jews of yesteryear, can start out on a whole new course of freedom of body and soul, mind and spirit, and pave a way towards a more productive future as liberated individuals and uninhibited Jews. Indeed, let's face it, if only we want to, we can set ourselves free. So we should all be able to indeed merit experiencing freedom and success in this endeavor. And as we always pray for, Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, experiencing our collective freedom for once and for all, forevermore, for one and all. And I wish you all a beautiful week, a Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you all, please God, again next week. Oh, next week is Erev Pesach.